Hi, I'm Tom Martin. I'm the CEO and founder of LawDroid, and we're a company dedicated to helping lawyers supercharge their law firms with the help of AI legal assistants that can help with everything from case law research to analyzing documents to even capturing new leads. The session you're about to watch first aired live at LawDroid's first annual AI conference. One thing I would ask of you is to please keep in touch with us. You can subscribe to lawdroidmanifesto.com, which is a newsletter where I can keep you updated about the latest developments in law and technology, and let you know about great events like this that'll keep you informed and that you can walk away from with actionable intelligence. Stay tuned.
My name is Nicole Morris. I'm at Emory Law School here in Atlanta, and I teach in the area of technology, innovation, intellectual property, and all things sort of tech implicated and the legal implications. And I'm going to hand it over to my co-panelist to introduce himself.
So I'm Dennis Kennedy. I'm the director of the Center for Law, Technology, and Innovation at Michigan State University College of Law. I teach classes there in AI in the law, new technologies in the law, and cybersecurity and data protection. I'm also an adjunct at the University of Michigan Law School, which is sort of just down the street from me in Ann Arbor. And there I'm teaching a class called Legal Technology, Literacy, and Leadership. And probably not to the surprise of anyone, most of the class time we spent so far this semester has been on AI questions.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a hot topic in law school. So this conference has been enlightening for me in terms of thinking about, I like Josh's example. So not so much use cases, but what are really good ways we can start training students how to use the tool. We have a little bit of a rubric, so or I shouldn't say rubric, but outline for us today. I know you can tell I'm in total law professor mode. I think we're going to sort of trade off. We talked a little bit about thinking about this like a tennis match. So the first big question that many of you or some might be asking, what are we doing? And the answer is everything and nothing all at the same time. It's basically that movie. There are lots of interesting programs. So unfortunately, Kat Moon could not join us and tell us about the AI lab that just got stood up at Vanderbilt, but it sounds really exciting. And I think they're working through like exactly what it is, but at the initial point, it's still thinking about the use of AI and the human in the loop, right? So Kat is very much a leader in this space and has been thinking about these issues for a long time, but we're not trying to replace humans with AI, but really how do we use the tool and work together? Here at Emory, we have an AI in the law, what you would imagine every sort of AI in the law class to include a lot on like LLMs. What are they? How do they work? What is generative AI? What is sort of like an automated deep neural network sort of AI and how are they different? And then what are the legal implications? So for the most part, we're really focused on copyright issues. I think they're the issues du jour with generative AI right now. But there's definitely privacy issues that we touched on throughout the day. The course I teach, where we're looking at like the legal implications for technology, we're actually reading the book by Kashmir Hill on Your Face Belongs to Us. So it's really all about facial recognition software, privacy. I wanted the students to also read Joy Bolawani's book, Unmasking AI, but I thought it would probably be a heavy ask to do both of them and some other project work at the same time. But the notion of this privacy and how we got to where we are with facial recognition is deeply fascinating to me. I don't think we're giving facial recognition enough, spotlight. It is an AI tool, but we tend to get, all the oxygen gets sucked out of the room with generative AI. So I'm hoping to bring some focus back to facial recognition software as well. And then we have some other sprinklings in terms of faculty teaching within their doctrinal subject matter. I know there's an advanced legal writing course where they're doing like blogging and other like social media, sort of like writing and AI, chat GPT, I guess to be more specific, using that to generate content. But that's pretty much it. Like everyone, there's like two camps I think of when I think of some of my colleagues and then other faculty that I talk to, not this group, not the people who are showing up today, but the others. And the others are just like, I'm not fooling with that. Like, it's not part of my pedagogy. It's not how my teaching methodology. It's not something I plan to adopt at all. And if anything, I'm telling the students it's not a code violation if you use AI. Don't use AI. I'm trying to design, everything about my course and around my course, so AI is never part of the equation, which I think is unfortunate. But before I forget, the other course that AI comes up a lot are our professionalism program and courses around professionalism, obviously for the obvious reasons why, and what you can and cannot do, and what sort of gotchas you need to be aware of when you're thinking about using AI for client matters in particular. So Dennis, now I'm going to pass it off to you. Tell us what's happening at Michigan State.
So I'm in honor of Kat, also who we miss. I'm going to take even more outrageous position than I might otherwise take in honor of Kat. But let me tell you what we're doing. So in the AI and law class, we are looking at AI and trying to use practical examples. And in a way, I'm in both the new technologies in law class and the AI in law class, I'm trying to teach the students to be the type of technology lawyer I was, and to say, if we're facing these new things that are changing everything, what do we need to do as lawyers, as practicing lawyers? And so my classes definitely fall into the practical skills area. And then I look for ways to use AI. So we talk a lot about it. I ask the students a lot in prep about what their thinking is in preparation for this presentation, and I'll share some of their thoughts. And then I'm very transparent in how I use the AI myself. I'm using, if people are familiar with the notion of scenario planning, so it usually gets associated with a guy named Peter Schwartz, but there are others. I'm using that as a way to establish 2x2 quadrants that sort of say like low regulation to high regulation, and then another axis to like low individual responsibility, high individual. And then I break the students into groups and I have them come at AI issues from those types of perspectives. And then I talk about ways that the AI can help them. And then I have a final paper class. So we've talked a lot over the last, from last year to this year, about how students can use it and where the AI makes sense for them. So my general assumption, unlike most of the faculty I've talked to, and I was recently at the AALS conference, so I can say I talked to a lot of and heard from a lot of faculty, so I'm not localizing to the two schools I teach at all. But I think the assumptions that people have about students not understanding how to use it and the limitations, to me, experientially are completely wrong. I think the students are very savvy. They understand the constraints, and they have a good practical appreciation of some of the issues. So last year, as AI kind of exploded onto the scene while I was teaching the AI in law class, the students then, and this is important because it was sort of more in the era of GPT 3.5, so you weren't getting as high a quality of results. But what they ended up deciding was that although the AI could help them in very limited ways in their paper, they did not want to use the AI to draft their paper, to do a first draft paper or to write it. And the reasons were, at the time, and I think this is still true, you're probably looking at a B- level work at best. And so law students don't want to be in that range. The other feeling that was really significant to them was that they would have to do so much rework. It was probably going to take them 2 to 3 times as much time to do the paper as it would if they wrote it otherwise. But in terms of coming up with topic ideas, outlining it, looking at the sequence of it, those sorts of things, they found it really helpful. And that's what we're doing now. In fact, in one class, we said, let's generate some paper topic ideas and I'll show you how this works. So I'm trying to be very transparent with it. So that's on the class side. And I just got the green light to do something I'm calling the legal R&D AI studio at the center. And we're going to offer to students 3 separate classes of training on prompting ChatGPT, which is the tool I tend to use, although we may end up with Bing AI because of the cost issue. And Nicole, I know you and I will talk about that later. Where I'm going to say it's going to be prompting 101, it's going to be prompting 201, and then we're going to do some research and say, what do legal employers expect from students? And then we're going to teach that. And it's going to be very hands-on. Which, if you're interested in doing something like that, I can tell you it raises issues around, you're going to learn about your university's AI usage policy and other things like that as you try to navigate that. So I've sort of like in class, and then this sort of extracurricular approach, plus we're bringing in a lot of speakers. So I sort of have a multiple, I'm approaching on multiple fronts, but a lot of it is just transparency and showing the students what it is that I do. And for a lot of them, it's like a real mind opener.
I love that. Yeah, no, I love the transparency part. I openly talk with my class about it as well. And things I'm hearing from students in terms of how they're using it. No one's really said that they're using it to write a paper for the excellent reasons you've already stated. I think they already know it's not going to be good enough. But for like assignments, like especially when you're thinking about more like practicing lawyer legal writing, so helping with like a summary judgment argument, helping with other like more practical pieces that they're looking for from some other coursework, how to shore up what they've written and to sort of revise it, zhuzh it up almost a little bit, make it sound a little bit smarter, brighter, faster, more efficient. Definitely a lot of use cases for it. And then a lot of like fun stuff, right? Ideas for dinner. Here's what I have in my fridge, build me a recipe, which I've used it for as well, and it's fantastic. And yeah, they're very, confident about what's available, the tools, because we're in legal, right? I don't get a sense of how much use would be like Midjourney and some of the image generated AI tools that are out there. I'm less familiar with it, and my sort of ecosystem is less familiar with it, but I'm getting the sense that the undergrads are definitely up on both aspects of it in terms of the image generating tool, and the power for papers for AI.
Yeah, it's interesting there. So a resource I recommend is Ethan Mollick, Mollick, who's a business professor at Wharton. He's doing a lot of practical stuff with AI. And he said recently, although somebody told me that other people have said this as well, that this is the worst AI that we'll ever see.
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully he's right. But it may not be. And so that's interesting to me, because I think that where we're at now with the GPT 3.5, which I wouldn't suggest that people use anymore, and GPT-4, I think we'd be better off if we were calling it GPT 1.4. Then I think we'd have much more realistic expectations of what it would do. And I just saw a note I made to myself. You recommended those 2 books, which I think are incredible books, and highly recommend them. But the book I use for my AI class is just called Artificial Intelligence. It's by Melanie Mitchell,
Oh yeah,
And
Melanie.
she's
Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
she's one of the key people in
Yep.
human-centered AI. And this book is the perfect plain language introduction. And all of my students have loved this. Like we start with this, and then they feel that with this background,
Yeah.
then they can start to actually handle the issues and see what's going on and understand how difficult some of the problems are that AI is trying to tackle, and what we need, how we need to shape or reshape our expectations. Because some of the things we're expecting AI to do, if I could say this on here, legal research, really incredibly difficult problem for this
So this
generation of AI.
this is a good, and we at the front of this for the rest of y'all decided that we were gonna have our time together as a conversation between each other, and you're witnessing it live and via this program. This brings us to the two big, the duopoly that we have, let's put it this way, in legal research, that being Lexis, that being Westlaw. I had the law librarian at Emory come present to my class on the Westlaw tool, actually both tools, but he did a little deeper dive on the Westlaw side. And I've attended the Lexis AI sort of demo tools for faculty. They're excellent. They can pretty much get you, if I were a partner at a firm and needing just like a really initial rough draft of a client communication, of a memo on an issue, a summary of cases, I type that thing in either one of those databases, and within 30 seconds, maybe that's slow, it's the university, internet, I get a report. That would have easily been, depending on the level of complexity, a week's worth of work in terms of, well, maybe not the client memo, but or the letter, but the memo for sure with an associate. And I thought to myself, this, and we talked about this when we had our prep call, and I'm going to say the ugly sort of phrase, this feels like job displacement a bit for legal professionals. And maybe it's displacement in terms of some of the very basic legal work that we were all trained on, especially my colleagues and us in the education space when we came through law school. I love that. We did the doc review with the boxes and the paper and the blah, and now we know we're not doing that anymore. But we also had to spend time going through information, distilling it, and writing a memo. And that's how we learned about the case. That's how we thought about what is our story for trial, like what other documents do we need, what other witnesses do we need information from. Like you figured out your gaps. I'm very concerned from a workflow, how do you learn about the practice of law when you can type this in to a database, an LLM, and it spits out the work product. Here are the pros and cons in my mind, right? The clients will love it because it's faster and cheaper, right? We get that. But how are you training folks to practice, particularly in nuanced professions, when you skip a huge, step function of the work, right? Like part of the way you learn how to deal with the patent infringement suit is like sitting with the patent, trying to deal with claim interpretation, trying to find prior art. If I can put all that in Lexis and it gives me a list of documents and I never really have to think about how it got that list, right? Because the magic's in the how. And we used to have to do that as humans. And we're definitely hitting, I think, an inflection point in terms of what I wrote down for myself is, and somebody else mentioned it today, so I'm glad it's being stated out loud. Law firms need to change how they train lawyers because you can't, under this current model, make it work, knowing we will have, to your point, 1.4 chat GPT in 2024. It'll, by the end of the year, it'll be, maybe 3.4, right? I don't know, whatever iterations in terms of the pace of the technology, but it's clearly accelerating fast enough that what we are trying to train law students to know when they enter the door at the firm, at the nonprofit, at the, in-house legal department. I don't know. So I'm handing it over to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes to, so I have a number of comments there, but there's a couple, two things that jump to mind. So one is that if we think about AI in the history of AI, that the goal for AI that would show that we actually had this artificial intelligence was it would win a game of chess against a grandmaster, of course, and it did. And then we said, no, that's not AI. That's not really human intelligence. After all, we're moving the goalposts on the AI. And then what we learned sort of is it's not the best. So the best chess player now is not a human and it's not AI. It's a human using AI, or as I sometimes like to say, an AI using a human for help. Either way you want to think about. So we looked at that, and I think that's a useful thing for lawyers using AI, because I often say, I've been saying to my students lately, is one of the things I like about ChatGPT is it reaches a point where it almost signals to you that it's time for you as the human to jump back in, that it's kind of
Right.
spinning its wheels and that you need to kind of
That's true. And you get the great answer, which is,
yeah,
I can't
you need
answer that.
to,
I'm only an AI.
yeah, you need to redirect. And the other thing I've noticed with AI is, and especially teaching it, is that AI right now just forces us over and over again to the most fundamental questions over and over again. So like your example of like, how do we get the training and have this mentor that helps us? And so some of us had that experience, but we look at the statistics and we would say, what, like a third of lawyers have mental illness, alcohol, other problems. If the lawyer I'm learning from is racist, sexist, whatever, then that becomes an issue. Or I'm at a place like I'm in a rural area or something, and there is no other lawyer to learn from. Then you start to say, well, we have this idea that we're comparing AI to sort of like the perfect lawyer, the perfect situation, that sort of thing, and it doesn't exist. So can the AI, in the cases where we have limitations, can it move us a little, to a better place? And is that what should be the realistic expectation? And then in the case of what I talk to students about is then we can start to evaluate these tools to say, like, here's where we are, here's where does this moves us to here, is that a good thing or not, does that help us, how do we think about those things? And then I always tell the students that I know that law, people went to law school because they never wanted to do math again in their life, but the fact is that AI works on probabilities and statistics, and you have to understand some of that. And if we say, in the books you mentioned, if you read those books, you would say we should never, ever rely on facial recognition technology at all. Zero, no way.
I'm even mad that I have the iPhone now. Every time I do my face to my phone, I'm like, damn it. Like it's almost like I'm sad I read Cashmere's book.
Yeah, I know.
Like,
But you might say, but it's 87% accurate, or it's 92% accurate, or whatever. And you would say, no, based on what I've seen, that's not good enough. And then we know from studies that eyewitness testimony is not good at all. And it doesn't even come close to that 87,
no.
whatever.
As a matter of fact, I would take that Clearview AI tool over. Listen, any of you have friends that may not always follow the law. You want Clearview AI, not some human in the lineup when you get into the police station.
And you say, so what are the implications of that? So, and it becomes systems questions. Like, we have the system that doesn't work. So do we need to use AI to kind of tweak this, do better within the system that doesn't work? Or does it point us to what comes next? Which I think is the interesting question to discuss with students.
I know we're kind of going off a little bit on a tangent, but I love it. But going back to sort of the Lexis AI and Westlaw AI, if you haven't tried it, our humans listening to us, they're excellent. I would definitely encourage you to try to get on. Now I realize it's slightly cheaper for us in the institution than it might be for you. So keeping that in mind.
It's a lot cheaper for us, right?
Yeah, I
In
know,
the
I know, I
university
know.
setting. I do want to say something about the Lexis and Westlaw AI, because when I talked to students this week, they said they used it, they were really impressed, but what they saw it gave them was a first draft, and that the guardrails on it felt really limited. They just felt it didn't allow them to do very much. And so what I've heard from, so that's like the hands-on experience, but I sometimes joke that when it comes to law schools and law school faculty and decision makers, the marketing money Lexis and Westlaw has spent has been some of the best money they've ever spent,
Oh, yeah.
because people say like, oh, I go to Lexis, hallucination goes away, like all these other
Well,
magical
that
things
was why I
happen.
was really
Yeah.
thinking back to those tools, because now here's at least a database, right? That has been trained in the law, both of them, for decades. And it's a first draft for sure, but it's a very trustworthy first draft. And like Westlaw has partnered with co-counsel, so I'll like drop some names here, right? And then I saw the announcement from Jacqueline Schaefer that Clearbrief is working with Lexis now. So I'm starting to see that these bigger, research databases will sort of gobble up or, try to get features from some of the smaller startups or, upcoming upstarts that have client features or customer features that are advantageous for them. But it's way better than what we had, right? So there's still, I still think there's a disruption wave coming for us in terms of where do we put people, maybe, and again, I'm going back to it, not trying to scare anybody. Maybe there's fewer paralegals on cases, right? Because we know we can manage some of this case workflow through a junior associate and one of these, AI tools. Granted, I think paralegals are worth their weight in gold, and every paralegal I've had has been just as good as any lawyer I've worked with. So,
well, and it may be the wrong. So this is something that I've really thought about, is to say we are thinking about using the AI in law. We're making a couple of really fundamental assumptions that I see. So I spent 40 years of law practice avoiding litigation and having anything to do with the litigation practice. So what I find in law school is they teach people how to be litigators. And AI, everything, like a lot of the examples say, it's all litigation.
It's all litigation, yeah.
And I would say your career, I believe, and my career in more business, tax, that sort of law, regulatory work, policy work.
I litigated for 3 years.
The amount of litigators
I did a little bit
among lawyers has shrunken dramatically. And we're still making this assumption there's a monolithic law practice. And I would say most lawyers don't even go into the courtroom anymore. We know from the statistics that like 80% of what I'll call like the personal law cases, this goes back to access to justice, self-represented litigants. So are we looking at tools and approaches for a world that no longer really exists or reflects exactly what's going on out there in the legal space? So again, AI is forcing us to say, well, what is the practice of law? What is it that we need to teach people? And does either the law school experience or the bar exam get people to where the future practice of law is going to be? And if I can inject my one most radical idea that I love to bring up, is that we start to think about AI as, oh, it might replace paralegals, it might do these things, commodity stuff, save time, how do we bill it? My thing is, what if the real benefit of the AI is to be able to say, instead of paying $1 million to Sidley and Austin for some kind of general opinion on something. What if I just do a prompt that says, assume that you are, Sidley and Austin's business, M&A team, and generate what, the advice that they would give me. And I save $1 million and I figure out what's important. And then I may go to them, but I really constrict what they're doing. And so the AI has potential at the very high end that I think lawyers don't appreciate.
I think we're there now, but I don't want to scare people too much. Maybe it's not the $1 million matter, but you're definitely there on the $100,000 matter, where you can kind of couple together. If I'm in-house, right? If I go back to my time when I was in-house, there's so much I could do. I would literally pay the license for Lexis to get that tool that I could get a lot of my kind of, get a sense of how much liability am I thinking about. And then I just need to get the law firm memo really for insurance, right? Let me go to my firm, say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Can you, can you give me a memo and find the stuff that I missed, right? But yeah, we're there. We're there today.
So that insurance piece is interesting. And then I think I don't know whether they'll get this to work the way they want, but I'd love if people have an experiment with practical law, like the combination of generative AI and practical law is wow, what it could do in terms of what happens in your day-to-day work to get you up to speed on things and to point you in the right direction, do checklists, all of those sorts of things.
Agreed. All right, let's get us back on track. So you mentioned, and I think this is right, I think this is why this is such a fascinating topic for legal educators. It's disrupting what has been our norm for hundreds of years, right? How do we teach the practice of law? I think there's a elephant in the room that we haven't mentioned yet, and we need to hear from them, that being the ABA. Right? Like we need to know in terms of, and I think you mentioned also the bar exam, right? We've got the next gen bar, got AI, and we've got people trying to say nothing to see here. I'm going to teach my classes the same way I've been teaching them for 40 years.
Because there's only one thing perfect in the world, and it's how I teach a first year law class, right? It's perfection.
That's a crash course. Like that's going to crash and burn, and how and what that looks like will be very different depending on where you are. But it's like Sesame Street. If we have those 4 boxes, that's not going to work, right? One of these things doesn't belong here. You thinking it's business as usual no longer belongs here. Starting 2024 for certain. It didn't belong here before, but we're putting you on the clock to try to think about this subject matter differently. But the reason I bring up the ABA is we know unless they make us do it, law schools aren't going to change. Two entities that will make us change. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I think the ABA, because we have to, be compliant and blah, 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 and employers. If you start getting the reputation that your students are unemployable because they don't know how to do whatever, you're going to change. Your institution's going to change.
So I would say what will change law schools is one other thing. U.S. News and World Report
rankings.
Oh,
right. Yes.
For better or worse, that will change things. And so it is interesting, like all these factors out there. And so you have a change in U.S. News and World Report's scoring that's happened. You have the new bar exams, which I have an opinion about, that this isn't the right forum for, but it won't surprise anybody. And then we're saying that AI is changing everything. And so you have law schools still trying to respond to those things, which, the new bar exam really raises the question of whether the curriculum still works, for what we're doing. And if I can use an example from my daughter when she was in college, I said, you could start with this job and just do it for 2 years, and it's only 2 years, and then you can go do something else. And her response was, not surprisingly for people who have kids this age, was, Dad, it's 2 years, and so I feel we're at this place in law schools with Gen AI, is that there's one way of saying like, oh, it's only been around like a year and we still have time to do subcommittees and task force and all these things and think about policies and all that sort of stuff. And then there's other people saying like, oh my God, it's been like almost 2 years already that this stuff has been around, and everybody's saying it's changing everything. And we in law schools, in educating associates, all these sorts of things. There's some stats came out on big law firms too. We as a profession are saying like, no, we're not playing a part in this. Like, we're waiting. We're saying you can't use this stuff. You can only use it in limited ways. At the same time, the policy decisions are happening right now. And we've abdicated from that. And we're also saying, we're not sure that we want our students to do these things because, truth be told, and I've heard this many times from many different institutions, we're afraid our students are going to use this to cheat.
Yeah.
Okay. And the student response is, we're not using this to cheat. Like, that's like, we're in law school. We're not here to cheat. And they're offended, as they should be.
Exactly.
And so there is this disconnect between, and the students will say to me, if this is changing the legal profession, and you're saying like lawyers might not exist anymore because AI will replace them, which none of us believes, then why aren't the law schools teaching us to use this stuff? Why isn't it in all the classes? Why don't we have special classes? All of those sorts of things. And I think that is a challenge, because the urgency that employers and students feel is way different than what the schools feel.
Oh, absolutely. It's frustrating, at least as someone who's in this space. I'm just like, I love the fact that you brought up US News, because I think that is a motivator for sure. But outside of, bad reputation as having unemployable students or the ABA, I don't know what will move the needle to sort of really think about this differently. Now, there are some schools that obviously are outliers in that. I mean, some of the schools outside of and I'm going to say schools, and then people will be like, what about us? What about us? But here are the schools that come to mind for me. So if I don't name your school, it's not that your school's not great. Duke comes to mind for me. Harvard comes to mind. Stanford comes to mind. And Suffolk come to mind. Like, in terms of people that I know on the ground at those institutions that are actually doing things.
And
Atlanta comes to mind, so I gotta drop Northwestern.
Yeah. Each in different ways. And that's another thing, that when you see the AI and the technology in law being taught at law schools, the schools are going in somewhat different directions.
Agreed.
So I would say, I would add another, other schools to the list, but it's a fairly small list, and they have this uniqueness typically. So I'm an alumni, but I love what Georgetown is doing, because they're focused on tech and policy, and being in DC is an incredible thing.
I should have named them, and now I'm shamed into saying I agree.
And then we'll think of others like, oh, why do we mention Vanderbilt? Why do we mention,
we mentioned Vanderbilt at the outset, so I think we saved ourselves. We saved ourselves there.
But I wanted to, before I forget my visual, I have this shirt, which I think sums up a lot of things that we talked about today. And in these areas.
You're not going to point out your computer, like you've got like the Apple, original Apple. Somebody should do something.
Somebody should do something. So, but because we're not doing something right now, something is actually happening and being done, and then we as lawyers going to say, oh no, we should do things this way, and you're going to say, oh wait, if the access to justice people work, they're going to do some totally amazing things, and we will be saying like, oh, ethical rule this, court rule that, what do you need to do? And they're going to go like, no, we're serving like hundreds of thousands of people who have happy legal dispute resolution experiences, who are able to get their records expunged, who are able to do all these things. And they'll route, and the internet is great at routing around problems. And I think AI
Yeah,
is gonna fall into that as well.
As someone who teaches in like tech commercialization, unmet need in the marketplace, there's someone who's going to come in and solve for that. I absolutely love it. And then there'll be at least some competitive sort of motivation for legal institutions to kind of get their act together. All right, let's go back to our list. All right, let's see. Here's my list of difficult questions. And I have 20 minutes until the top of the hour. So I think we have about 10 more minutes.
I think we have a timer with 10 more minutes, and then we'll feed in some questions. So people have questions, go ahead and put in the Q&A, and we'll work on those as well.
All right. So I think some of the things that I think are thorny for us to figure out would be balancing teaching the AI tools, because the space is evolving, right? So it's a little bit of a whack-a-mole, trying to figure out like what to teach, right? If we're like, okay, everyone's on board, but then it's like, what are we teaching? Versus the traditional pedagogy, right? So to my point earlier, in terms of like, I feel there's this benefit in terms of like legal training, in order for me to know that the stuff I get from ChatGPT-4 or Bard, to know that it's crap or basic, I gotta know how to write the darn thing to begin with, right? If I gave an output of any of those tools to my son, he'd be like, looks good to me. Is it?
Right.
He's a high school junior. He don't know nothing about the law. So of course it sounds great. It had like a legal word in it a couple of places. He's like, check, check, and check. So I think there's trying to answer that question or those questions. That's one of my hard question points. What's the role for AI in legal writing, right? So some of the legal writing faculty, to the extent that you're out there, yay, you do the hardest work in the building.
For the least pay too.
All of the things, we're lifting you up. It's super disruptive for legal writing. Like all of the prompts generate written content, right? Like there's stuff that we're skipping. And it can't be an all or nothing, right? It can't be like, nope, we're going to pretend it doesn't exist. Or maybe there is. Maybe there is a 1 year, first year curriculum. It doesn't exist. You're fired if you use it. And then after that, you're 2L and a 3L. You really need to learn how to use it. But we need to figure that out. And then the third thing, in terms of training lawyers for the future, some law firms are buying commercial, like things that are on a shelf, working with vendors. A lot of law firms are building their own LLMs, right? So what do you want us to focus on at the law school level to train students that you'll find employable, can help you when you're kind of building your own private, AI? Like, I don't know what they need to know to be able to be effective associates at your firm. So those are my hard questions.
Yeah, and I think that the difficulty that I found is that, and this goes back to AALS conference, was where I attended every AI session there was. And I was a little discouraged, not because there are some cool things happening, don't get me wrong, but it's faculty talking to faculty in every case. And so they're not talking to students, and they're not talking to employers. They're not talking to experts in the field, as someone mentioned in the chat. They're not reaching out to the people in the education department who are doing massively cool things and thinking about this in very structured ways. And they're not taking advantage of some of the things we did. So we're sort of repeating some of the problems we had with online education, where we just kind of walked away from it instead of taking some of the best things that we learned from it. And the unfortunate thing is that when we do that, and it's even going to happen with AI, is it causes accessibility issues. It causes other issues that people forget about. So one of the things I found, and this surprised me a bit, but it will make sense, is that ChatGPT 3.5 is terrible. So like the free version of ChatGPT, I wouldn't even suggest people use. It has so many limitations, but it's free. And so that's typically what students do, and they get disappointed with it, and they're not really good at prompting. So that makes it even worse. And I say, you should just, like, the $20 a month for the paid version is like the best money you can ever spend. They go like, yeah, I just can't afford
I
$20
had
a
someone tell
month.
me that.
You know,
Now I use Bard. Which is still free. So anyone looking for a tool, Google's, and I think Bard is quite excellent. Now I could be biased because I do think Google already has all our data, which is why Bard is really good. So Bard is good by design. They've been collecting our stuff for a while. But yeah, I use Bard. And then one thing I do like about Bard, because obviously I'm a law professor, so sometimes I'll ping it with a question and it'll go, dun, dun, dun. I can't give legal advice, right? If you ping it with a medical question, it'll go, dun, dun, dun. Can't get any, medical advice. And I'm like, all right, at least you're trying to help out fools out here trying to do too much. So I appreciate that. But Bard, I think, is good. But yeah, I had a student tell me the newer version was a bridge too far, and I thought, well, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because it points to the imbalance that's already there. Because wealthy students can afford tutors, they can afford other help. If you're a first generation law student, you have issues because you don't know exactly how the system works and how to take advantage of it the way that somebody whose parent or grandparent was a lawyer. And so some of the things I've looked at is, can we use the generative AI as like this advisor or a learning assistant to help some of these students?
I think this whole notion of inequity and learning tools, in some respects, is actually equalized. So for example, if you just direct people to still some of the free sources, it's good, versus what we've known, if you're a little bit more privileged, your family, you have someone who's a lawyer, what we would call like the horn books and things to get to help you understand what was going on, right? So there's a level of that still exists. But I think one of the speakers earlier mentioned how it closes the gap between, like, if you're a top student and you're sort of like a mediocre student, you move up to the middle of the pack. I think that's absolutely right. I think for students where English is not native English speakers, I think it's super helpful.
It's
right?
incredibly helpful to those.
Right. So from an equity perspective, if you want, to not further stigmatize students who have not studied English as a native speaker, then tools like, a generative AI are super helpful. But yeah, it will exacerbate sort of like who has access to what. Again, not trying to like only talk about my facial recognition book, but the technology, Clearview AI, well, they shared in the author shared how they had allowed like some celebrities to have access to it. Like Ashton Kutcher had it and Joe Montana wanted access to it. I'm just like, what is happening? I'm now learning about this tool that like the uber rich were like running around, like snapping pictures and Googling faces, like, back in 2018. This is kind of crazy to me. But I think that to some extent, that continues to perpetuate with AI, right? Like it's just ChatGPT made a splashy debut, but there are lots of other LLM,
Right.
tools that are running around that people don't know about.
Yeah, lots of different AI. So that's one thing I talk about is like artificial intelligences or augmented intelligence, assistive intelligence. I sometimes think that conversational AI is a better term than
Yeah.
generative AI. And Kevin Kelly, who's a technology writer and sometimes called the world's most interesting man, he has this notion of artificial smartness, to say like what we're looking for AIs is we just need to grab little pieces of it. We don't need it to, to become a human. If we use the AI to say like, here are all the things I have this week, here are my priorities, like map out my week, my schedule for the week, the value of it is awesome.
That's actually a great point. All right, let's get to some of the questions.
Okay.
So we can be fair to the folks who stayed with us to the bitter end. I was just going to go down numerically. Josh had a question about our faculty responded to efforts. Slightly, nothing to see here comes to mind. Like, yeah, you're the person that really gets excited about technology and okay, but that's not my thing.
Right.
That's not what we do in con law. I'm a con law scholar, or I'm a law historian, or yeah, I don't know. What are your colleagues?
I think that they like to say somebody other than me should do something. And so what you see a lot of, I think, is that faculty is, and I think the law schools are moving things to the law librarians.
Yes.
The sort of training thing. And so my approach to say like, oh, I want to accentuate AI for students and show them how to really do it, in that way, is to say, here's how to use Lexis AI or Westlaw AI. I want to say like, I want to show you how to rock the world, and how you can do the things that your employers are going to be asking you to do, because that's the feedback I'm already getting from students, is that when they go work at a place, they go like, oh, this is great. You're the new lawyer, the new summer associate. Yeah. We're giving AI to you. And so that's one of the things the students want, is to say like, if you know this is the work we're going to do, why aren't you training us and helping us with that?
Yeah, no, that's right. All right, let's see. I have used, the next question is dealing with the effectiveness of plagiarism checkers. I actually used it last semester for a couple of assignments I had submitted on Canvas, which is like a learning management system. I thought it was quite good. Now it's a percentage, and I don't know what the name of what Canvas is using as their plagiarism checker, some software, but they give you a percentage of how much of the student's content can be found in either another student paper or was reproduced somewhere else, and then it spits out a report. What are your experiences with plagiarism checkers?
So what my understanding is that in some of them, the accuracy is around 20%, so less than flipping a coin. I had a student who said that he put a portion of an article he did 3 years ago, so before ChatGPT, into a plagiarism detector, and it said 30% plagiarized.
Oh,
okay. So most people who have expertise in this area say, no way, it doesn't work, so that's a concern. And the plagiarism issue is really interesting, because if I use the same prompt, the AI is going to generate something different each time. So it's like, the notion of plagiarism is sort of a challenging one for us to get on top of. And so I think it's a concern because of the impact of a false negative on plagiarism is so devastating for a student.
Yeah, I will say that thing scares the bejeebas out of all of the students. Like if there's one thing, that and failing a course, but you kind of know if you're going down the failure road, it shouldn't be a surprise. But the plagiarism road is definitely, I'm typing an answer to a question.
I was just, somebody asked about how do you get ahead of the curve. So the one thing that people who have gotten good at AI and and I'm sure that Josh will also second this, is getting hands-on with it. You just got to keep working with it, and then you learn what the constraints are, what it does well, what it doesn't do well, and what it can be used for, and then identify the people that you go to. When Catherine Sanders Reach talked about like all the different tools that she's tried, I was like, whoa, like my recommendation is like just find one. It's one of the main ones. And for Nicole, it's Google Bard. For others, it's Bing AI. For me, it's Chat GPT. And I'm just going to try to get really good at that and look for things that transfer over. And I have concerns on any number of fronts about smaller legal specific ones that, or ones that ride on top of some of the big tech AIs that aren't like specialized in the way that I see things. Like ClearBrief is a great example. Is a tool I love. I love what Tom's doing with LawDroid. I think it works in a lot of really cool practical ways. And so my approach on the AI right now is look for small practical uses, and then things that you can do on the prompting side and really start to experiment with that. So the paper I think Tom will include in the materials from me shows my approach on that of really concentrating on the prompting side and what I'm doing with personas and very structured prompting.
All right, last question. We can try to get folks back some time. Somebody wanted you to restate the different types of AI, like assisted, conversational. You'd mentioned it. And
yeah,
if
so
you don't
this
remember,
is
we
like
can
an
just send them to
informal
the
thing.
video.
So there's like a whole bunch of different AIs. So if you think of large language models and generative AIs, I like to think of it this way. I do not want to use that AI to drive my self-driving car. It's just the wrong AI for it. Because I don't, what's text prediction going to do in that? So I think you think in terms of multiple types of intelligence, and then you think of smaller intelligences. And so you're saying like, oh, this is this grand artificial intelligence. You say, some people like the term augmented intelligence or assistive intelligence. So you're saying we're not trying to replace the entire human brain. We're just trying to have this helper functionality. And with generative AI, you generally I type in this prompt and it gives me this answer and I use it. And I think that kind of puts you to a point where if you don't think it through, you don't use the power of it. So the power is when you basically are doing the follow-up, and saying like, give me 25 ideas on this. Now give me 25 more, give me 50 more, go in this direction, do these things. And so that the notion that it's iterative and that the first answer is never going to be something that I'm going to use. I'm going to just keep it drilling down until it comes up with something and it's tireless. It doesn't mind that we think its answers are dumb. It doesn't have its professional reputation on the line. It will just keep doing this stuff. And you go like, I once did this thing where I generated 300 ideas on something. And I got 2 ideas that were useful and one that I used. And I did that in 15 minutes. And it was an incredibly great use of Chat GPT. But, if I just stuck with the first 25, I wouldn't have been happy. If I just said, give me 5 ideas, there's no way it would have helped me. So that's how I think of those things.
Hey, you two. I just want to say it's really been mind-opening. I think that there's so much to think about in terms of how do we teach the law now that there's AI. It's a big question, and I think that both of you have gotten a great handle on how we start answering that question. And thank you, by the way, for going through a lot of the questions that we have.
Oh yeah,
Really
no, I mean, I
appreciate
want to make it useful for the people who stuck it out.
But
Yeah.
I always like to say, like, one of my principles in these things is that the whole room is always smarter than the person at the front of the room. So you do want to get the input from people and the questions that they have. I also asked ChatGPT to assume the role of the audience and to put together a list of the questions the audience might ask. And the ChatGPT thought our audience was really sophisticated and smart with great questions. So I pat on the back to our audience because ChatGPT thinks highly of them.
Well, as it should, and as you can see, there's a lot of love here coming up in the reactions to your session. And one last thing is I just wanted to say that basically the conversation that all of us were a fly on the wall for the past hour was fantastic. It was very, very casual, and thank you so much for letting us listen in.
Thanks for inviting us.
That was another great session from LawDroid's first annual AI conference. Thank you so much for watching. Please keep in touch. Subscribe at lawdroidmanifesto.com, where I can keep you updated about the latest developments at the intersection of law and technology, and let you know about great events like this. Keep in touch.